Hello, and welcome to the 7th class on David. Let's start with a quick review. Last time we studied David and his experiences in the wilderness, where he didn't let Saul define his life, but let God dominate and provide refuge for him. Today we find David living in the wilderness in Paran. As we know, the wilderness can be dangerous, so he's formed a band of men around him. Since hiding from Saul is more of a part-time job, the group spends time protecting others from danger. The wilderness is filled with bandits and outlaws, as well as wild animals. Remember, the story of the Good Samaritan started when a man was robbed and beaten nearly to death while traveling between towns. Essentially, David's men functioned like a neighborhood watch group. Let's turn to 1 Samuel chapter 25. A certain man in Maon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal. He was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite. Nabal was a shrewd businessman who had large herds of sheep and goats. His great wealth makes us a little suspicious he may have skirted the laws in the Torah that inhibited the concentration of great economic power in just a few families. We are told his name is Nabal, which in Hebrew means fool. Now, Nabal wasn't considered a fool because he had a low IQ, but as we discover, his behavior violates the social norms of etiquette and law. The text also supplies two other hints to the man. Nabal is surly and mean, so his character leaves something to be desired as well. And he is a Calebite, which means he's influential. Caleb was Joshua's right-hand man at the time that the Israelites came into the Promised Land. We also meet Nabal's wife. His wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman. In contrast to Nabal, Abigail's name means her father rejoiced in Hebrew. Her character is also described. Notice the text says she is clever and then beautiful. The focus is on her character before her appearance. We will find that she is intelligent in a different way, what we would call EQ or emotional intelligence, when she deals with David. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Therefore, be favorable toward my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." David and his men provided protection for Nabal's herds and the shepherds, and now it's time to shear the sheep. This is a harvest celebration, kind of like Thanksgiving, and David's request to take part in the feast is natural and normal in their society. So Nabal shouldn't be surprised at the ask. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?" Rather than do what was expected in polite society, Nabal refuses David's request, and then on top of it, goes and insults his men as common criminals. How do you think David responds to this insult? David said, "It's been useless. All my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." For David, these were fighting words. David's response? Revenge. We see that Nabal's offensive behavior triggered the same reaction in David. David is on the verge of becoming just like Saul, wanting to eliminate anyone who threatened his position and losing his sense of identity along the way. David was letting the circumstances get under his skin and losing touch with who he really was, a follower of God. Ever been there before? Have you felt threatened? Your status, your role, your position, your way of doing things, your traditions, your way of life. And then what bubbles up is pettiness, rude behavior, or the urge for revenge. Ugliness tends to lie just under the surface for too many of us. Now, enter Abigail. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Night and day they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. Shepherding is dangerous work. You don't just have wild animals to deal with, but sheep are your mobile bank account. And then there are thieves around every corner. David's men protected Nabal's herdsmen and flocks from all types of danger. Abigail had heard about what was happening out in the shearing shed and understood the consequences way before her fool of a husband did. So she gathered a grand feast to appease David and went to intercept him herself. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to what that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him." Abigail found David, dismounted, fell to her knees, and reasoned with him. As she's speaking, we realize that she understands Yahweh better than many Israelites do. "Since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my Lord be like Nabal. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord. When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him, and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or having avenged himself." Abigail also has a religious insight her husband doesn't have, because she calls on David to remember that it isn't his responsibility to take revenge. That's God's work. To remember that if he walks away from God, then David becomes a hollow shell of himself. He really isn't David anymore. To remember that David's life is formed by God, not by the fools in the world. Abigail tries to speak God back into David's life. Abigail is essentially saying, David, one fool in this story is more than enough. And David listens. David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own eyes. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, "Go home in peace." Now don't forget, Abigail is on the margin of society. She's a woman in a man's world. She has no weapon in a world that's armed to the teeth. She's wise and beautiful in a world that's foolish and materialistic. She possesses most inner beauty, her good sense, as well as outer beauty. And Abigail used both to shock David out of his slide into cruelty, so he can see and hear God again. Instead of massacring Nabal's family and his herdsmen, David chooses to allow God to deal with Nabal. Abigail then returns home to find Nabal hosting a drunken feast, and she waits until the next morning when he's sobered up to tell Nabal what had happened. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. God deals with the foolish Nabal, protecting David. David remains on the path to the throne without Nabal's blood on his hands. God works through ordinary humans, our opportunities, our decisions, our actions, to bring about his will. I think many of us can identify with Story because, if we're honest, we most often play the role of the fool. Someone offends us, doesn't give us what we want or think we deserve. Someone opposes us or demeans us or dismisses us. Our ego flares up and we call it righteous indignation. We're wrapped up in ourselves and our feelings are hurt, so we want to hurt back. It's true that hurt people hurt others. And something beautiful stops us. A child playing, a beautiful sunset, a couple walking down the sidewalk holding hands, a favorite song. The beauty breaks through our self-importance, and we realize there's more in life than our momentary feelings, that God is listening and wants us to go to Him with our wounds. Beauty then becomes a witness to God's work in the world. There's a tradition in the church, especially in the Eastern Orthodox, in which beauty points to God and calls us to prayer. This is where we see the use of icons to focus our thoughts during prayer. Beauty forces us to use our senses and acknowledge that there's something deeper in the world we can't explain using reason. This is why you don't ask science to decide whether the music of Bach or Beyonce is better. When you're in the presence of something beautiful, you want to be involved, tapping your foot to music, touching a sculpture, contemplating a painting, dancing to a song, meditating, praying, believing. Artists know that beauty is more than skin deep. Beauty can reveal goodness and truth. And where beauty is best revealed is in the human face. Abigail reminds David of his identity before God, that God sees him as beautiful. There are too many fools in the world and not enough beauty, too much ugliness and not enough grace. Beauty reminds us that we're wrapped up into the beauty of God. And fools, they become just an asterisk in life. So some important takeaways. If we're full of ourselves, we're empty of God. Emptiness can turn us into fools. And God created us in His image. We're beautiful. I'd encourage you to check out the discussion guide, which also includes study suggestions and other activities. Thanks for joining us. Next time, we'll see how David builds a community from a group of misfits. Until then, keep the faith.